just wanted to get you on and take a coach who's basically grown up in St. Louis, played in the St. Louis baseball scene. This is baseball 101. Let's break it down to the bare bones. We have right-handed pitching phenom Nick Boughton here. Welcome in, everyone. This is Baseball 101, powered by Youth Baseball Midwest. I'm your host, Dave Wiggins. Calling in today on the Prime Sports Midwest call line, we have Justin Snider. Justin is the current elementary school principal at Billings School in Billings, Missouri. And Justin was the state champion head coach of Miller High School last year and subsequent years before. Really excited to get Justin on and talk to him about his experience as a high school baseball coach and just kind of get his thoughts on a couple of different topics. Justin, how you doing today?
Doing very good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for being on.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Justin and I had not talked up until last night around 9 p.m. after my kids were fighting to go to sleep. Our conversation lasted a few minutes, but it was easy to tell that today's show is going to be really good. Miller is a Class 2 school, and I've just joined a Class 2 program myself in Principia, and kind of learning from Justin about small school baseball and how the roster constructions can be different, and
Yes.
playing those rural schools that that have some big time talent on them, even though they're small schools. Excuse me. I think this could be a really fun show for everyone listening. First off, Justin, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into coaching, maybe a little bit of your playing background, and what
Okay.
you're doing now.
Yeah, I was born in Tulsa and lived in Oklahoma until I was 4 or 5, and we moved back to Missouri to Springfield. My family and my family name is kind of a generational type thing that you just go to Hillcrest High School in Springfield. From about the time Hillcrest existed in the 50s, there's always been a Snider, Eisminger, Drumright at Hillcrest, and if you're from Southwest Missouri, then those names mean something to you, and some older people in the state may mean something to them. So fortunate to grow up in a family that was a baseball oriented family. My uncle Kelly played for the Dodgers, my uncle Keith played for the A's, and then I've had a few more family members play high level D1, and then my cousin of mine, Mike, made it with Florida as a pitcher. So I grew up in a different world than a lot of people. When you're young, you don't really realize how lucky and blessed you are to feel like it's normal to get to go to locker rooms, to get to go onto the field, to get to go run the bases and take ground balls, or maybe even take hit in some
Yeah,
situations where most people have to stay in the stands, and you're getting to do all these things that other people don't get to. But we moved back to Springfield when I was young. So I grew up in Springfield. I'm a North Sider. I went to Hillcrest High School, played baseball there, and then went to SBU my freshman year, and then transferred to Evangel in Springfield after that. I joke all the time, the Division I skills jumped my generation between me and my brother. We were good players, but we were definitely not Division I baseball players by any means. So enjoyed our time, or my time at Evangel, and then jumped into the coaching world pretty quick. I went to school to be a lawyer, actually, my first 2 years, and I got an opportunity to coach at Hillcrest junior high baseball in the summer for Legion, and I caught the bug and switched, and now reside in that led to my first head coaching job, which this could be a good learning thing for all the young guys coming out of college that think they want to be a head coach. I took a head coaching job right out of college and was not even remotely close to being ready to be a head coach. I still thought that it was going to all be about baseball, and that, I guess I jokingly say now that as a head coach, your job's about 30 to 40%, baseball, and the rest of it's managing everything else that goes along with being the guy in charge. And I think that's really hard for young people to understand. And now I understand why my coach in high school played for Byron Hagler, one of the best coaches, in the state of Missouri. He's a Hall of Famer, and just learned a lot from him. But he made that comment that be careful jumping straight in, and he goes, it's okay to be an assistant for a few years, and he was right. So I was at Marionville in year 1, and we didn't we weren't bad. It's just the managing at 22 years old, the managing of things, I was not prepared or ready for the side part of it. So I stepped back and went to Stratford for 4 years as an assistant coach. We had tremendous success between 2007 and 2011 there. During my time there, got to learn a lot working with Shane Pierce, and then I coached basketball with a guy named Mike Wilson, who's a Hall of Famer too. Um, so got to learn a lot about managing rosters, managing parents, managing fundraising, manage all the stuff that's not to do with the actual coaching part, on top of just learning, management skills and game management skills, probably more than anything, from those two guys. In 2011, I jumped at a job in Clever and was able to be the head coach there, much more prepared after, 1 year as an assistant, or 4 years as an assistant and 1 year as a head coach.
Yeah.
And then I was lucky to be at Clever for, I believe, 10 or 11 years. And we had a really good run with huge growth there. So when I got there, we were a class two school. When I left there, we were borderline in class four. So the growth and what you have to do with your roster and schedule was, a big learning experience. But we had a ton of success there. Had a couple Final Four runs, several district championships, conference championships, and then I caught the administration bug and in 2022 decided I was going to go to Miller to be an assistant principal and AD. And in the middle of the summer, the baseball coach had left, and guess who they asked to coach baseball? Um, so that's kind of how I got, I say roped into. I secretly still kind of wanted to, but I had to convince some people in my family that was going to be, um, okay. And that, led to me coaching baseball there for 3 years. I told them I would do it for 3 years until my assistant graduated to kind of bridge that gap. And then it turned out to be, a great life experience. And then chose to kind of step back a little bit. I've done it, for 20 years, and I'll be honest, I was tired and needed that break. My daughters are a junior and an eighth grader, and spend more time with family and at home, and at least until they graduate, and then we'll go from there. I never say never, but right now I'm still pretty content about not looking at the forecast every 5 minutes, and not, sleeping a little better too.
Absolutely. You said you went to Hillcrest High School. Current coach at Lindbergh High School, Darren Scott, attended
Yep, he was one
Hillcrest.
of my coaches.
Was he really?
Yes. Yep, Coach Scott. He was one of my freshman football coaches. He seemed to think I was really good at football. I was not. Okay. I knew nothing about football. I was just fast and had no regard for my body. So I was just like a heat seeking missile. He would run coverages. I didn't even know until I was like 22 what cover two and all that meant. I just found the football and hit somebody. So I had no idea what he was talking about, but he seemed to think I did. But then he was one of our assistant coaches in baseball too.
That's awesome. I consider Darren a good friend, a good mentor. He helped me a lot when I first got that head job at Webster, with just like you're explaining, the admin side of everything, right? The non
Mhm.
fun side, right? Because
Yes.
we all want to be a head baseball coach so we can run a program and we can be on the field, writing the lineup, being the guy that makes the decisions. But there's so much more that goes into it outside the lines, and yeah, it is hard jumping right in to being a head coach as a young coach, especially, or not having been an assistant at the high school level, or a lower level coach at the high school level.
Yes.
Um, what were some things that you took from your time, the second high school you mentioned where you were an assistant? Which one was
Uh,
that?
Attention to detail. Coach Hagler in high school, we were really good. We had great pitching. We had good players, but I think our advantage was our attention to detail all the time. He did not allow for us to not be the most fundamentally sound team or the most prepared team on the field. He always referenced that we have the skill, but the difference between in big games is the details, and who is going to be more detail oriented on everything. And I think that, not in a bad way, but I think that sometimes that gets labeled as old school, where today's a little bit more free flowing. Just from seeing it in some of the younger coaches that you coach against, it doesn't seem to be like there's more just let things happen and see what happens, and less trying to control what happens. Um, where ironically, I strongly feel like we won a state championship because we controlled the narrative as to how the game was played um, before they could. And to me, that kind of goes back to the detail oriented, things. But the managing of players that don't start, I think, is something I learned a lot at as an assistant coach. While I was at Stratford, Shane did a really good job of managing the bench players and making them feel like they had a role. And I think that's an important skill to have because I've been fortunate a couple times where I've got guys on my bench that would be starting at a lot of the schools that we play. That's going to happen all
Right.
the time, by the way. So
That's fine.
if you hear the phone, but I think managing your bench is an important part too because they're one injury or one second away from having to step in and play.
Yeah, absolutely. What were your responsibilities at Stratford as a varsity assistant? What did Coach Hagler have you doing?
Well, Hagler was at Hillcrest. Coach Pierce was at Stratford. Hagler
My
was my
fault.
high
My
school coach
fault.
at Hillcrest.
You're right. Yeah.
So I was a middle infielder. A lot of which when I was at Hillcrest, I was there as an assistant for 1 year, and I
Okay.
was in charge of outfield. Which he goes, this will help you in the long term, and I'm like, I don't have a clue what I'm doing. I played one game in the outfield my entire life, and that was a state quarterfinal game. My I think freshman year or sophomore year of high school, I got moved to right field at a playing Francis Howell at a park. I don't remember what Francis Howell it is that plays at a park, but they played at a park and there was a softball game going on to our left. I remember that, but um, so that was my only experience in outfield. But it was a great experience as a coach because you have to learn something new. At Stratford, base running and infield play was my two main areas.
Awesome. I mean, talk about a position that, especially here in the Midwest, is often overlooked defensively. It is outfield, right? We've got all these
Yes,
nice sport facilities with turf infields, but the ceilings might be 10 to 12 feet high. You
yeah,
just can't develop outfielders the way you want to indoors. You've got to get outside. You got to see the ball flight. One of the coaches on here, Joel Credo, who's the new head coach at Troy Buchanan, he and I have talked extensively. He's a big believer in just launching a frisbee and having him run down a frisbee. He's like, man, if you can go
yeah,
catch a frisbee in the outfield, you can definitely run down that 5 ounce baseball. So
absolutely.
all different ways to approach outfield play. And being an infielder your whole life and working with infielders and then having to understand that outfield isn't just going and catching the baseball. It's not just keeping the ball in front when there's no one on
Yep.
base, not letting the runners advance. Like I try to make my outfielders understand you're the last line of defense. If you make an error, if you make a misplay, it's 2 to 3 bases. If the
Yes.
shortstop boots a ball, you're right there to back him up. It's a 1 base error.
Mhm.
If you're at the field that you played Howell on, there is no fence, right? That was probably Blanchette Park, no fence. It's kind of how it was labeled. you,
Yeah.
you don't have a fence to keep the ball from rolling. You
That
know,
was a really long time ago, so I don't really remember a lot other than me getting thrown into the outfield and the softball game going on next to us.
but yeah, just having, at the younger ages, especially, outfield is an unpopular position for kids. And, at
Yeah.
8, 9, 10, usually your weaker players are put in the outfield. But getting them to understand by 12, 13, especially some of the competition that's being played with the bats these kids are using now, outfield play is vital. And owning the fact that you're an outfielder and taking pride in the fact that you're an outfielder, and just reminding them that some of the best athletes in the world play the outfield at the highest level. It is a position that we want kids to take pride in playing. Sorry, that got me going on a little tangent there because
No,
I
you're good. I
just
just talked to a youth coach, a friend of mine that coaches an 11U team in Oklahoma, and we were talking about. He goes, I've got a stacked roster of 12, and I go, that's great. They're 11. No high school coach cares what championships you win at 11 years old, but I
yes.
go, what you can do is teach those kids to play one primary position, but also be very good at two or three other positions because. And I gave him this example in 2019, my district championship team at Clever, all three of my outfielders were former shortstops.
Yep.
So
There you go.
um, it, it
Well, and
it's
you'll hear college coaches say, "Yeah, we recruit 7 shortstops, and we just throw them all over the field," right?
that's hilarious you say that because I've always told people if I coached college, I wouldn't recruit anybody but catchers because they can play first and third. I wouldn't recruit anybody but shortstops because they can play second or third, and center fielders because they can play both outfield positions.
Yeah, up the middle is important, and pitchers
Yes,
obviously.
yes,
Yeah, it's funny. I had a pretty good class of kids that I coached last summer, and when I would talk to coaches about some of my position players, that was the first question they'd usually ask. Yeah, can he play left field? Can he play center field? I see he's playing second base today. Can he play a corner outfield spot? Because
yeah,
that's something these kids have to understand is the more multi positional you can be these days, especially with the new rules in college baseball, even in high school baseball for that matter, just the more opportunities you have to get on the field, right?
yeah.
When
I
I
mean,
coached, no, you're
I'm
good.
the
Go ahead.
Genius 16U coach when I was coaching with the Midwest Nationals, who is Marucci now. But
Yeah.
I put Carson Shaddy,
Shout
who
out
was a
Randy
four
Moore.
year Yes, who was a 4-year starter at Arkansas, and he started as a freshman as a catcher, and he was my second string catcher as a 16-year-old, and he was playing all over the place for me. He ended up playing all over the place for Arkansas, but I don't know if that says I'm smart and helped him develop or just stupid for not letting him catch when that's what he ended up doing as a freshman at Arkansas. I'm not sure which way that goes, but versatility, I think, especially as you get older, is huge because it can get you on the field.
It can, especially at smaller schools. Sometimes your best athlete's going to end up playing shortstop. You're going to end up playing
Yes.
center field, and he might play third base or left field on his travel team in the summer. But just given the numbers you have and what you have talent wise, you might need that kid who's been a third baseman, first baseman his whole life, playing youth ball and travel ball. He might be your shortstop for 4 years. He
Yep.
might even be your catcher if he's athletic and tough enough. So
Yeah.
um, yeah, being able to play multiple positions is just becoming more and more important. Um, yeah, and a lot of coaches they will put who the best 9 or 10 they believe are in their lineup, and then they figure the positions out. They're offensive minded. They want to score runs. They understand that defense defense can be taught to a certain degree. Certain defensive positions can be taught. Being able to square up the baseball consistently that's much harder to do.
Yeah.
So all PSA to all those kids out there, don't be upset if you're playing outfield at the youth
Oh,
level.
absolutely not.
Your coach has immense trust in you to go run the baseball down out there. I can attest to it being a 12U baseball coach with those darn -8 rocket launchers last year. Outfield play was very important, and I'm even seeing it now at 13U with the -5 rocket launchers that these kids swing.
Yep.
You better be able to go get a baseball, and
Yeah.
it's important. Um, moving on to Clever High School, where you
Yes.
essentially didn't get your first head coach gig, but more or less it was your first after that 1 year.
Yes.
How how did you kind of change your approach as a head coach? Did you have a freshman JV varsity? Were you running an entire program? Was it more just the varsity team? How did your approach change versus when you were that head coach for 1 year when you were still pretty green?
It changed significantly. My foundational beliefs did not change. My structural beliefs did on how to. Shane Pierce allowed me to run the summer program at Stratford, which was really good for me because it allowed me, um, the management to learn the other side of the management skills as far as that goes. So uh, we had freshman or JV varsity teams every year. Probably, I do think I was there for 11. Yeah, I was there for 11 years. So probably of those 11 years, I think we had a freshman team, maybe 4 of those years. Um, I either kept 22 or I had a freshman team. I didn't ever go over 22 just because I felt like playing time wise, that was not, conducive to what we were trying to develop and do. But it wasn't until probably year 3 or 4 that I was able to get more than one assistant. So I'm at a
Wow.
class 2 or a class 3 school with just me and one other guy. You have to learn to be a jack of all trades, when it
Yeah.
comes to that. But we ran big summer tournaments. I was able to keep my kids for the most part. When I first got there, I had a group that had won, I had a group of seniors that had won no games as freshmen. I had a
Wow.
group of sophomores or juniors who had won. They had just come off Final Four, so it was a very unique group where I had 2 classes who had not won a lot, and then I had 2 freshman and sophomore classes that were now sophomores and juniors who had done nothing but win. So it was a very unique, dynamic to walk into. A great one though. because they were so hungry to keep winning that they,
Right.
our practices would be over and I'd be there for another hour hitting ground balls or throwing in the cage, or they'd want to go do extra hitting. And um, so that was great. But we were in a great summer program too. Of my kind of general rule, because we had fall baseball. So my general rule is we'll play through June and then we'll shut everything down to give you 2 months of summer, and then we'll start back up, towards the end of August. Which fall baseball was great at the time. You get 3.5 months of practice and 25 more games. Your freshmen are basically sophomores by the time they hit the spring. Um,
Yeah.
and and so that experience is great. But you're managing 3 of the 4 seasons with baseball, so you've got to be detail oriented and structured to do that. And I think you have to make sure that roles are designated with your assistant coaches, and that everybody kind of knows what their roles are as far as that goes. Which I don't think I was real good at when I was younger, but as we all get older in our coaching career, we get more, we steal ideas from other people, and I think that's what the clinic's for. And just you hear people say stuff. I know we talked last night about some of the things that I changed last year in our program. 2 of those things that I changed, I heard at the clinic and had heard for multiple years, and then just decided to do. So, but it was definitely more of a structural and organized approach at Clever. We were kind of a machine. We were a well-oiled machine after about year 3 of just doing the same thing every year, but it just kept producing teams that produced on the field. So I didn't feel the need to make huge adjustments once we got rolling.
Yeah. Did your kids, although they played with you in the summer and the fall, did they also play on summer club organizations or Legion teams, or
Some
how did that
did and
work?
some didn't. And this was kind of a trick. So when I was in high school, we went to Omaha for a tournament, and I immediately worked it in to where we would go to Omaha during the World Series, and I had kids that would stay with me. I really didn't lose a lot of kids to travel ball because all they wanted to do was go do that. I had a catcher named Chance Wolf that probably would have greatly benefited from playing travel baseball, but he chose not to. And then his senior year, he had committed to SBU, and he had had some Division 1 talks, but they were worried about playing Class 2 baseball and how that would transition as a catcher outfielder to if he could hit. And then he goes and plays for the Nationals in the summer, and he has all these junior colleges trying to get him to transfer in, saying you'll be a D1 player at semester if you want to. Um, I mean, he was that good. And then it's the only time, and I won't say what school it was. It's the only time I've had a Division 1 coach come and tell me we missed, and because he ended up being for like, he set the all-time career hits record at SBU, and I mean that's a high-level Division 2 conference,
Yeah.
MIAA at the time,
Oh yeah.
and
Oh yeah.
he set the career record for hits there, and was a 4-year starter. But there was one Division 1 coach that just laughs and says we definitely missed on him. So, but now the structure and foundation, we didn't have a lot of kids leave towards the end of my tenure there was a lot more transition to travel ball. But down here, your options at that time were the Nationals or nothing. So there
Right.
wasn't a lot of options. And then the Hartleys came in with 417. Then you had a few more. And now we've got kids down here that go to St. Louis and play, or, Arkansas or Oklahoma. But it really wasn't big down here until probably 2018, 17, 18-ish. And then you started getting more programs, and that's when I started losing kids, which is fine. As long as they're
Yeah.
playing, I don't care.
Well, I mean, the onus is on you to develop them, whereas we in St. Louis, we really don't have to develop our kids nearly as much as we used to
Yeah.
have to, because the clubs are doing it for us, right? And
Yeah.
we rely on those clubs to work with them in the off season. Misha has rules against us working with our kids, for certain
Yeah.
time periods, or only having certain contact days. So we're kind of hamstrung in that respect, where we really need those clubs to help our kids get ready for
Yeah.
the high school season. You necessarily didn't have that. You kind of had to do it yourself, and that's not easy to do.
It's not. And summer can be hard because you've got to work with all your other sports. I will say this, though. My kids that went and played travel ball, I knew at the time that Friday through Sunday I would never have them. Now, eventually that turned into Thursday through Sunday sometimes. But so I tried to schedule a lot of our games on Mondays and Wednesdays, or Monday, Tuesdays and Wednesdays, or Thursdays, to where at least they would come and hit. And I knew if they were a pitcher and they were throwing that weekend, I would never have them throw in the summer. But
Yeah.
I also knew that I need you to come hit with us, and it's good for team building for you to still come play with us during the week and get extra swings in. That's not going to hurt. Extra ground balls, extra, just playing catch and staying in a routine. I think one area that maybe does benefit kids to do that is they get to stay with their recovery programs if they're a pitcher. I know some people don't have recovery programs, but we have a pretty specific recovery program when I was at Clever and Miller, and it allowed for them to continue. So if they threw on Saturday, they knew, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, they knew everything that they would be doing. And if they didn't come play with us, then maybe that routine in the summer gets thrown off. And I'm a big recovery person.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. Well, I've had my guys doing recovery in the hotel gyms before.
Yeah,
It's not as easy to get done as it is in the comfort of your own home, or or at your hometown high school that
yeah,
has the bands, has the plyo balls, has the med balls. Um, it's interesting to it's interesting to think. It's hard for me to even comprehend getting to work with my high school kids as often as you guys did when you were at Clever, and having a fall season, which is something that's completely foreign to us St. Louis folk. We don't get to play fall baseball. If they're
yeah,
playing fall ball, it's they're playing with their club, right?
yes,
But it's a really, really good point that your freshmen essentially they do come in as sophomores. They played a full season. They played 25
yeah.
games, as high school baseball players. That's a really interesting and unique perspective. And I like that you hit on that. Um, Fall ball to me is kind of tough. I hardly believe that many arms are conditioned and ready to sustain a fall season after pitching in the spring and summer. Um, I almost think fall ball would be better served if there was a machine on the mound instead of a pitcher, and hitters were getting pitches that they could hit and they could put in play. Defenses were working, and it was kind of more of a shutdown or like an off time for pitchers where they could go through their throwing program, but they don't have to be on the slope as much.
Yeah.
But it's I don't know if we'll ever get to that here in the Midwest or anywhere for
I,
that
I
fact. I
can
just
say this now that I'm not coaching, so I don't have to knock on wood when I'm saying this. But in my 11 years at Clever, we had fall baseball for 8 of those 11 years. And then we added football right around COVID during that time.
okay.
So we lost fall baseball. But during that time period, we had one minor shoulder issue, but we had no other pitching injuries during that
Wow.
time. And um, you know, a lot of that was during the time of no pitch limits. Now, that being said, I never threw guys in the fall over 85 pitches. Very rarely would I do that.
Mhm.
Um, so it was, you build and you develop. I joke all the time that the one team down here you don't want to see um, is Josh Hughes and Purdy in the fall, because they'll play, or in the spring, your first couple weeks, because those kids have played. He's going to max out his schedule. He's going to max out his practices in the fall. I mean, those kids have done a full season coming in, and plus he's a good coach. But I mean, their fall can be very beneficial, but it is becoming harder. I think as I watch fall baseball around here, it is becoming harder to get kids to play. You know, 3/4 of the year, even half the year with fall. Just the decline in the amount of teams that are down here and the level of play, I think, is significant. But then that's just trends too,
Yeah.
because where a little bit east from here 10 years ago was not great, at fall baseball or at baseball in general, is now stronger. And now maybe the West is a little bit weaker. So that's just trends, and that flows, especially in small schools, significantly, every couple of years.
Yeah, but you saying, even though your boys were playing all those games and your pitchers were logging those innings, you were adamant about making sure they had their recovery program. And
Absolutely.
that's a huge part of, arm care is a buzzword nowadays, right? No one really knows what the hell arm care is.
Yeah.
It could be so many different things. It could be bands, it could be med balls, it could be getting a good night's sleep and a good meal, but
Yes.
having an actual program that your players know that, and that's where the structure comes in, knowing exactly what they need to do, after a high intent day, knowing exactly what they need to do after a bullpen day, and putting the onus on them to actually execute that and do it, and eventually I found that the more kids do that, the more they buy into the recovery part of our sport, the more they almost like crave to do it when they're done playing. It's almost like it's really become
Yeah.
a part of what they're doing. And did you see that as well at Clever?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like one of the things that we did was we allowed them to have input in the recovery program. I'm not a believer that one size fits all when it comes to recovery. So, we combined some driveline strategies, we combined some old school strategies. We tinkered with stuff, what made them feel good after starts, what didn't make them feel good. And I think the epitome of that is you can come to me and tell me you have a recovery program. Jace Wilkinson, my number one pitcher from last year at Miller, had his recovery program. I did not mess with that. It's something he had done. It's something that him and his, summer coaches had developed, and it worked for him. So I did not mess with that. But if you don't have a plan, I'm going to put you on our plan, and we can always tinker with it. And I give the guys the flexibility to, if this does not make you feel good, but taking, one minor thing out of that program, and you do that and you feel better, then that's your plan. Not everything has to be done for every single kid. We're all different. Every kid's body and structure is different. So
Sure.
if your med ball throws after you're throwing on day 3, I'm just using that as an example. I really don't know off the top of my head if that's actually a thing in our program or not. I'd have to go back and look. But if that doesn't feel good to you, or that makes your shoulder or back or triceps hurt, then don't do it. The one stickler in there for me was sprint work, mixed with a little bit of long distance. I'm still a believer that, and I know studies and statistics will show, but I'm the one that didn't have anybody get hurt, so I'm going to stick with what I
There
saw
you
in
go.
my own data in my
There
own
you
head.
go.
So from what I saw, and sometimes I think, as much as data helps us, sometimes I feel like it micromanages us a little bit on common sense, in areas. You just have to do what's best for the players, and every player is different.
Sure. I couldn't agree more. It's funny you say that. I was going to ask you how much running was included in your recovery or at your practices, and then was it more sprint work? Was it long distance? But you essentially kind of answered that a little bit.
I don't think that running is ever a bad thing. It's not going to hurt you. That's the thing. It's not going to hurt you.
100%.
I don't like to run. I didn't like to run as a player, but if it's purposeful running, then I think that's very different. So, like, every night after my kids would throw, they would run a mile. That was a non-negotiable. And then we had a sprint work program set up for them for the following days, where there was not a lot of distance. But I did believe that it did not hurt them to go run a mile that night after they threw, and that sprint work on top of that the following days, is not going to hurt them. So there's no negative effect to running, even though in today's world I know that some programs and some people don't run at all, and that's fine. That you're everyone that's the great thing about baseball and in coaching. You're free to run things how you feel, work for your team and your kids best, and there's no right or wrong way.
Absolutely.
It's just, you mesh systems and you do what's best for you and your kids.
No, I love it. I think the everyone can agree that running long distance or sprint work, but long distance for that matter, you're going to be in better shape. Your cardio is going to be
Yeah.
better. Your legs are going to be stronger. They're going to be under you longer. And
Yes.
today's pitcher, they're good for 4 to 5 innings, if that. How can
Yeah.
we help our guys get 6, 7 innings in under 105 pitches? That's not easy for a lot of these kids. And
Yes.
I'm with you. There's different ways. There's different things that work for different kids, right? Obviously,
Mhm.
if I've got a long, slender, skinny pitcher who needs to put on some velocity, who might move fairly well, I might kind of cut his running base, versus the bigger, broader shouldered, bigger dude who might
Yeah.
need to cut a couple pounds.
Yep.
Everyone's different, right? Um,
Absolutely.
Me personally, I just like to have my pitchers run the bases during our scrimmages and our defensive work. That's kind of the way that I get them to purposefully run, because they are running, but they're also giving my defense a good look. and at a school like I'm at now, I barely have enough players to run defense with
Yep.
base runners. So I've got to get
Yep.
creative. I mean, the other day I literally used half the field so I could have enough runners to run against my
Yeah.
defense. I couldn't have nine position players out there.
Yep.
So yeah, it gets a little tricky. Let's fast forward a little bit to your time at Miller. I
Uh-huh.
guess going about how that all started, and then let's really dive deep into your state championship run. And then
Okay.
you do not have to give us any keys to success there if you don't want, but I am very curious how
Oh
you
no,
guys did
it's
it.
it's I've been very open with what we did, and it's not a secret. Um, People can. I think this goes back to something my high school coach told us. People can know what you're doing. They still have to field and throw the ball. So,
True.
and throw strikes. So I think we had a very significant, unique way. The local media, for some reason, started calling it chaos baseball, which is ironic because I'm a huge Oklahoma fan, and that's what they called their World Series run a couple years ago. So for me, as an OU guy, I was like, hey, you can use that term all you want. But
Right.
no, so when they asked me to do it, I actually said no the first time. And I started texting and talking to some buddies that were in the conference, and the one word just kept coming up. They just need more discipline. They've got some talent, but they need more discipline. They had one winning season in the last 7 years before I got there, and I was very hesitant. I didn't know if I had the energy to do a complete rebuild of a program, and I didn't know if I could do it in 3 years because I was very adamant about the 3 year mark because I wanted to be dad for a while, and
Yeah.
I was tired. So, I was set on that 3 year mark, and a lot of people are like, "You left two sophomore arms that won a state championship for you, guys." I was done anyways. So, and I was, set on that to spend more time at home and like that. But so I said yes based on mainly Darren Henderson, the Stockton coach. He's like, Justin, they've got kids that can play. They just need more structure and discipline. Well, I can do that. So we came in, um, a team that I believe they were 6-14 the year before I got there. In year one, we went 16-11, and I think the big topping was we beat like the number two or number three team in the state in like week three. We were, I want to say, like 6-1 at the time, and people were starting to kind of take notice that we were significantly better. These kids had talent, but I think they weren't baseball smart. They were just very athletic. In Miller, every kid plays everything. So I had kids playing four sports: football,
Oh,
track,
wow.
basketball, baseball. We had to share athletes, and with track, which was something I wasn't really used to at Clever. It never happened at Stratford or Marionville, so it was something. It was different, not a bad different. I just had athletes all over the field. They just weren't baseball smart. So, like one of my seniors, I'll never forget this, comes to me on a pitching change, and the bases were loaded with two outs. And I had told him that you guys need to be going on a 3-2 count. And he goes, why? And I'm like, oh my, because you're a senior in high school and that's what you say to me, but yet, hey, we just keep winning ball games. So we're, it's at a certain point, it's just too late to teach that kind of stuff where you're just trying to teach them, hey, we're going to be really, really good at everything that we're good at, and we're going to get better at the areas that we struggle in. And I knew that we had good pitching. I knew that we could have good defense, and our base running had to be great because my worst area is offense. I was a really good hitter. I am very bad at teaching offensive play and hitting wise. I don't I say this humbly, but like hitting was not hard for me. So it's hard for me to teach it because it was natural to me. And I think there's a lot of guys that would say, maybe the areas they were in, maybe that's not their expertise. I think it's ironic and funny that you have so many guys that played college football that end up being high school baseball coaches because maybe they were better at football, but knowledge wise, they're better at baseball, and
Oh,
um,
yeah.
but I got there. We finished 16-11. We had a great senior class. I knew things were going to go great on like the second day of practice. Colton Brown, who ended up being my starting first baseman last year, asked a question as to why. And one of my, ironically, guys that helped me out as an assistant last year told him to shut up and just do whatever coach said. And I was like, this is going to go well. If I've got my senior saying that. we had a little bit of a setback in year two. We were really young on the mound, and we went, I want to say 9-13 or 10-13 in year two. Our setback was a lack of discipline, not just from the players' side, from the coaches' side. We were all very distracted at times. It was a hard year at school. Like, it was just rougher. And then we were so young on the mound that of our 13 losses, 10 came with us having a lead in the sixth or seventh inning and losing. So
Wow.
we could
Wow.
finish, we could get to the fifth or sixth inning of games, and then because we were so young on the mound, I'd have to pull a pitcher, and I didn't have enough pitching depth at the time because the baseball around here is really good in the class 2 and 3 level, and even in class 1. And you're going to get beat if you don't have that guy at the end of the rotation or enough depth to, and it killed us. And then but that led to us stepping back and developing. I wrote them down before I hopped on here because I didn't want to forget one of them. But me and my assistant coaches stepped back and we looked in the mirror and we're like, what do we have to do? We didn't have Jace at the time. Jason rolled Wilkinson into school. So we knew we were going to have that top end arm that could get us somewhere. And I had to believe that I had another fresh or sophomore named Hayden Schnocky that I threw him in almost every big game we had as a freshman. I'm sure his dad wanted to kill me because he kept, getting his brains beat around for the first month and a half of the freshman year. And then his ERA went from like the fives down into the low ones. Things clicked for him at the end of his freshman year. And that was my hope, was that, okay, we may not be a district championship team this year, but man, I really think we could be and make a run a year from now. We've just got to develop on the mound better. So I threw guys to the wolves, and we stepped back and looked in the mirror, and one of the areas, here's the 6 areas that we deemed that we needed to be better at. We needed to be better at the warm up. We needed to be more disciplined. I believe strongly that how you warm up can play teams off the field. I say that because when I was at Clever, we played Silo, Oklahoma, who's won like 18 or 19 straight state championships. It's an unbelievable program in Oklahoma. And they're a
Wow.
small school who is continuously pulling out Division 1 kids from this small town outside of, I can't remember town in Oklahoma. I'll remember it at some point. Um, it's in southern Oklahoma, and when they got off the bus, you were intimidated. When they warmed up, you were intimidated. And I remember my kids in the dugout talking about their infield, outfield, how they warmed up, just that aspect. So we agreed that the warm up needed to be an area that we looked more structured and more disciplined in to see if we could gain that small advantage. And that includes infield, outfield. The second area was a Scott McGee term. I remember Scott a couple years ago saying you needed to be able to hit velocity to win a state championship. So before that time, we had done nothing but live arms. Very rarely would we run a machine up. So last year in the offseason, day one, we cranked it up and we set at the 79 to 85 mark because that's what we saw in our conference, which is a very good conference, at the Southwest Conference. You were going to see 79 to 85 every night. So that's what we set the machine at, thinking that, if we see somebody over 85, that's a gym in high school baseball in Missouri. And you're probably not going to do a very good, like, you're probably not winning that game anyway. So, um, we set the machine at 79 to 85 almost every practice, and then we re-emphasized small ball, but smart, purposeful small ball. We wanted to bunt when we could create chaos, when we could force guys to move. But at the same time, what it indirectly did was 1 through 9, anybody in our lineup could bunt. The semifinal game against Chaffee, we broke open because my 3-hole bunted the ball at the first baseman, and the pitcher didn't cover first, and we scored 2 runs on a missed throw. So then we looked at base running. Our base running, we only stole like 50 something bases that second year, where last year we stole almost 140. So we broke it down so far as to I watched this thing on YouTube with Gwinnett College in Georgia. They've got a great YouTube video on base running, and I had done
Yeah,
this
they
at
do.
Clever, but I really brought in some of the aspects to Miller because I didn't feel like we were. I mean, honestly, I just didn't feel like we had more areas to worry about than that aspect. But we got so detailed that it went from, okay, a ball's hit and it hits the dirt, grass, or grass, dirt, grass. Are we taking 1 base or 2 bases from first base? If it goes dirt, grass, I mean, that's how detail oriented we got. And these kids, by the time they were seniors, because I had a good, solid group of sophomores, by the time they were seniors last year, the new kids didn't know, so they were just eating it all up, and their baseball knowledge, our baseball IQ tremendously went up, and looking at these things and how we took bases, we were just super aggressive. The need for a closer. I talked about how many games we lost in the last couple innings that second year. The need for a closer. So I took my number one pitcher, who was my starting shortstop, best overall player and best highest IQ on the team. And I told him, we're going to make you a closer. And he ended up going 6 for 7 in saves last year. And the one save he didn't have was a ground ball error. So in the seventh innings. So that was huge for us. Something that I had noticed when I was at Clever, I'd cut practices down during season. I used to be a 3 hour all the time guy. Now I was a 3 hour guy up until season starting, and then I noticed I got more out of my kids when I cut back to an hour 30 ish during the season, and we just maintained. They were more fresh. They didn't complain about being practices if it was cold. They knew that we were going to get in, get our work done, and go home. There was no elongated, and then we would spend every Wednesday working on things that we needed to work on and get better at. But routine and the shortening of practices, I think was beneficial for our kids staying fresh, never complaining about being at practice, and positive attitudes. And then how do you get kids to choose to be great? Um, my, uh, I've been told I was crazy for doing this, but I designed a picture of a state championship ring last year before the season started and put it on my TV in my office, pulled my seniors in and said, this can be yours. Like, you have an opportunity at this for the next 3 months. I need everything from you, and I need your full support to get everything from everybody else. Because if we're not one and not on the same mindset, this won't work. They thought I was crazy. They will tell you they thought I was crazy. But then as the year went on, they started not thinking I was crazy. And then, that kind of just led you brainwash kids. That's what I'm trying to do at the elementary here. I'm brainwashing kids and used to be great every day. They walk into school every morning. They hit this giant sign that's in the front of the building that says, I choose to be great today. And, that's kind of what we're in the business of doing, is brainwashing kids.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's almost like my 4-year-old son before he goes to school will play the affirmation song by Snoop Dogg. It's
Oh,
like a
yeah.
little kid's hip hop where
Hmm.
he's like, I choose to be great is literally
Yes.
one
Yeah,
of the phrases that they say. But
absolutely.
it's something that and yeah, you can call it brainwashing, but it's more just like it's the positive reinforcement and the encouraging them to just make sure they understand that no matter how good or bad you're feeling today, you can still be great. There are areas in your life that may not be going well, but you can still choose to be a great person. You can still give it everything you have. And you know, Coach Beckman at Francis Hall Central, what he will do before practices, and he said he got the. We all get things from other people, right? He said he got this
Yep.
from another coach. He'll have his guys basically do a 15-minute mental reset where they just lay on the
Oh,
turf.
absolutely.
He's
There's a
fortunate
lot
enough
of
to have
teams down
turf.
here that do that.
Are there really?
I'm a huge advocate for that kind of thing. This could be a whole other hour long session, but in 21, when I was at Clever, we had a player that had passed away from a mental health issue, and it greatly
Hmm.
significantly impacted our 21 team, who was going to be like, we were
Wow.
Final Four good that year, and it was, I could dive into that for hours. But what that led to was me being a much better person and a much better, I feel like, coach, um, to care more about our kids and how we talk to our kids. I mentioned it at the clinic that one of the things for me was, hey, don't forget, no kid's trying to make an error strike out. We can get upset. That's fine. Sometimes they need a good rear end chewing. But at the same time, man, we got to love our kids, because what that led to was doing a bunch of work with. I think I talked to Brian about this a little bit, with this board right here is from Athletes Against Anxiety and Depression, who works with high school, college, and professional athletes about anxiety and depression, but making sure kids realize that as long as they learn from their mistakes and attempt to make to progress and get better, I think it's important that we show a lot of love and care and support for those kids, even especially on the bad days.
Yeah, just like you explained when you were talking about pitchers and different methods to get pitchers to recover. Every kid's different. They're all going through something different.
Yep.
We all move differently. We all swing a bat differently, but we all go through different things in life at different
Yep.
times. And he is, we have, upwards of 20 to 30 to maybe even 50 kids in our program, given how big the schools are at which we coach. We can't even begin to fathom how those kids are thinking on a daily basis, and if
Yeah.
we don't take
Life's
time
hard right now,
to get
man.
and love
These
them,
kids deal with a lot more stuff than we dealt with.
way more. They have way
Yep.
more on their plates.
Yep.
The pressure is immense. The pressure to be average is immense. When you ask them to be great, like you are really, some of them you're asking for a whole lot, and you have to remind them that your challenge to be great isn't a challenge. It's an encouragement. It's a
Yeah.
dude, you've got this. You have all the ability in the world to get this done, no matter how you're
Mhm.
feeling today, no matter what went on at home, no matter what grade
Yeah.
you got on that test. We can rise above that. So I think we need to
Yeah.
have you back on and talk about that, because we could
I'd
definitely
love
go
to. It
we could
is,
we could
as
go
I told
hour
Brian the other
plus.
day, it is deep and sincere to my heart and belief now. Just helping others, and I go around and give talks to high school teams about mental health and stuff like that now, and how to handle situations like that. But I think what that does in creating that atmosphere led to the atmosphere and team that we had last year that made our run. That, man, they loved each other. We all search for that team that gets along, that once doesn't care to come to practice, that wants to have that goal. And man, they bought in, and it was awesome. It was just an awesome ride with that group of
Yeah.
kids. Once we got out of districts, and jokingly, once Chaffee knocked off Valley Catholic, um, everybody kind of, it's kind of like the girls basketball world. Everybody just watches Incarnate Word, and you're just waiting to see if
Yes.
somebody knocks them on. If not, you're like, well, maybe we're playing for second place. So, but
Right.
and the mindset of our kids all last year was just amazing, and positivity, and they're going to have brotherly fights. We all have, that always happens, but the pieces came together, and once we got out of districts, um, outside of, we were up 10-1 in the sectional game against New Heights, and it started raining, and next thing you know, it was 10-6. Nobody could throw a strike,
Oof.
and nobody could field a ground ball. I had to bring in a guy that had thrown like 16 innings the entire year, but he threw a solid 56 miles per hour, because all I was trying to do is get pop flies, because I knew we weren't going to field a ground ball or throw it. So, and he came in and he got 2 pop flies, and we won the game. But you know,
Wild.
that the run was awesome, and our kids played so good. In the Final Four, we only had one extra base hit. We did everything through base running,
Wow.
singles, and bunting. Um, so we even stole home for the first run of the game, the state championship game,
That's
because the kid was
electric.
in the lineup, and my leadoff hitter looked at me. He didn't even say anything to me, and I looked at him and I shook my head to do it. And that's how we scored the first run of the state championship game, because he knew that he could beat the guy, because he had been, this is how specific we got, though, in our base running work. We taught kids to time in their head. We told them we timed how long it took them to get from their lead to home, lead, first base to second. And if you've got that in your head and you think you can do it, give us a sign. And, that's the freedom, though. You give them, yes, I trust you. That's a trust thing. If you think you can
Yeah.
do it, man, let's go. One of the things I
Yeah.
was told before the state championship game was, don't change how you coached. Don't let your team change how you're playing in a big game. And we just came out and we, singled them and base ran them and bunted them to death, and ended up winning 7-1.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's funny you say that. My story, our state championship experience at Webster is different. We did do things the WG way. We didn't stray. We ran a pretty aggressive shift against Scott McGee's son Jarrett when he was a sophomore.
Yeah.
He had arguably probably the biggest at bat of his life was that night, and he beat our shift. But I told our guys after the loss, I said, we lost the WG way. Like, and if we
Yeah.
won the WG way, we lost the WG way. At least we did it our way, and
Yeah.
we could go to bed, proud that night. So it is great advice, for I mean for anyone, for that matter, young coach, whatever. Do what got you there, right? Like, there's a
Yes.
reason you got there, right? Do that. That's what
Yep.
makes you successful. Um, yeah, like I said, we'll absolutely have you on again, and we'll dive deeper into the mental health and the just like the care of our kids part of
Yeah.
coaching, which needs to be addressed. because the X's and O's, I think, sometimes gets too much credit. Our kids need to love us. We need to love them. We need to buy in. They need to buy into us, but in order for them to buy into us, they have to trust us. And
Yeah.
all these coaches we're talking about buy in. It's like no one's going to buy into you if they don't trust you. If they don't
Right.
believe that you care for them, that you want the best for them, they're not going to buy in.
Yep. Yep. I cringe at some of the ways I coached earlier in my career. But from 2021 on, I can proudly say that I became much more sympathetic to their needs and just making sure they knew that they were cared about and they mattered. And I do think that makes a difference.
Without question. Well, Justin, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate your time. We will have you on again. We're excited to talk to you about the other side of baseball. But for everybody here, for Baseball 101, powered by Youth Baseball Midwest, I'm Dave Wiggins. I'm your host. This was Justin Snider. We will see you next time.